Good evening. This is Orson Welles.
By the time we did the first series, which Orson Welles hosted, that really put the whole series on its feet. I started piano lessons quite early because my mother loved music and wanted me to get underway. I had an older brother who, being 5 years older, he was well into music. So I was taking piano lessons, I think probably age 5. I was very lucky because coming from an upstate city of no particular size, Elmira, New York, my music teacher had a very good background. She was a prize pupil of Edward MacDowell and had European training and so on. I started doing little bits of improvisation and playing by ear. The moment that I put my hands on the keys, I know that at age 8 or 9, I would entertain family with Broadway show tunes and so on. So I'd always really enjoyed the process of working with a small audience and seeing what reaction was and so on. And I also wanted to make sure that I could play in a variety of keys, because that's fairly critical. If you're an accompanist working in one key only, the film will seem like it's a one-key film. And so that kind of spread. So I did my first writing for instruments, a group called Perry's Playboys. We were very good with things like South of the Border. I've got spurs that jingle, jangle, jingle, and so on. And we specialized in this Spike Jones piece about Der Führer's face, when der Führer says we are the best disgrace. That was a particular treat. So I was playing it for school events, things of that sort.
This is all in Elmira.
This is all in Elmira.
Yeah.
But there came a point, because quite frankly, I needed stronger school systems than existed in upstate New York at that time. So my brother, who had been something of a problem teenager, he was very smart and let his parents know that, and he needed a little adjustment, and he was sent to a military school in Indiana. After he left and my turn came, I had no need for a military school, but my father had learned to like the uniforms. So I was sent to Indiana, and there I produced and wrote my first full musical. And it probably was helpful in getting into Harvard, because if some kid is writing musicals and fighting a military system to do it, maybe he'd be of some interest. So that I was then writing pretty steadily through teenage years. Coming to Harvard, the push was on, would I please write some Hasty Pudding shows, so the fairly famous group of students doing musical writing. I wanted to be completely classical at that point, because if you do have a chance to work with Piston on harmony and counterpoint, you've got his books open in front of you and so on. And when Hindemith came up from Yale, I sang in his chorus. I remember vividly when we were about to start a rehearsal, and the pianist gave the opening notes to soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and Hindemith hit the ceiling. He said, "I give the pitch," which was perfect, by the way. But he was part of a movement that made sure that music had a goal and a purpose of, if you will, kind of a businessman's approach. And I took that away, and all of my compositional years have been writing with a very specific goal, as something that's going to be recorded. It's already scheduled performance. I have a very empty piano bench, meaning stuff that's never been heard, and Hindemith was a big part of that. My closest relationship was with Randall Thompson. Very right wing. We didn't talk much about politics, And I believe he was important in seeing that Irving Fine did not get a permanent position at Harvard. Irving then went to Brandeis and became very important for them. But I loved the melodic approach that Thompson took. His symphonies, which Bernstein loved, were full of melody, his choral writing, and I think the most significant course was studying very closely the Beethoven quartets. It's great music, the early, middle, and then you get into those glorious late quartets, the Opus 130s, 131, and so on. So Randall probably was more in tune with my type of thinking and his particular compositional skills. So that was a good trio. Because Harvard was very supportive of individual activities and encouraged that, I put together my own orchestra, which included some Boston Symphony players and better student players, and we did interesting stuff. I did a concert that delighted me, which was based on English and French music of the 18th century. And was able to persuade the ambassador from Great Britain and the ambassador from France to leave Washington and come up for the concert.
That's amazing.
The first half was French, and we ended with a Gossack arrangement of the Marseillaise, which incidentally included a cannon shot. And I had some fellows who were working with me, and I said, I'm going to need a little sound of a cannon just before the final chorus comes roaring in with the Formez vos bataillons and so on.
This was hopefully an outdoor concert?
And I got a phone call confirming that that there would be 4 French 75s that Fort Dever, Massachusetts, could make available for us. I said, that's very, very good, but this is an indoor concert. And so we got a yacht cannon. That's a small thing that fires off the starting of a sailing race, and that did quite well. We scared the bejesus out of the audience, of course.
How big was the hall?
I would say it probably held about 800, maybe something like that, and was well filled. The second half we ended with Rule Britannia, of course, so the Brits got their comeback. And one of the pieces, I decided I wanted to do the Royal Fireworks music of Handel, as it might have been heard on the Thames when it was first being performed. This took a lot of planning, but I managed to bring together 16 oboists and 12 bassoonists as part of the group that played the Royal Fireworks music. And I had problems finding a contrabassoon, but Boaz Piller, who was the contra player for the Boston Symphony, was available. And so he came to play with us, and Mr. Repeat, by the way, and the one really heavily professional. But we had every oboe player from Western Massachusetts and Eastern Massachusetts and so on. So that was it was a good experience, and I guess represented in terms of whatever I bring to the table, the more of the production side, or as much as the musical side, just trying to collect players and get them rehearsed and put them together and so on. The U.S. Army was waiting for me as soon as I got a diploma, and that was an interesting experience because it was the Korean War, 51. Once they had given you basic training, they decided by no particular careful means whether you would go west and end up in Korea, or east and end up in Europe. And you kept your fingers crossed, because And my assignment, fortunately, was Europe. And even more fortunately, they looked at my background and decided that I should probably be in special services, which entertained troops
Right.
and so on. And that was lucky because, as I like to say, I did have a friend who was assigned to the medical corps because his background as a salesman was with Dr. Pepper. And so I got sent to a training school, and I learned to play the Fipple flute recorder and so on. I learned to referee wrestling matches, a whole assortment of whatever might amuse the troops in their.
Our tax dollars at work.
Yes, very important that you know that. So, at any rate, I got sent to Germany and was assigned to Berlin, which was fascinating because this was a very heavy-duty time with the four powers in Berlin.
Right.
And my roommate in a barracks there was a translator for the four powers when they met. He had 13 languages. They insisted he should also know Ukrainian. That took him 2 weeks to be fluent. I flash forward to visiting some friends in Berlin, and I finally found their apartment, which was a bit out of the city. And looking out the window, I said, "My God, I see my bedroom." And their apartment was directly across from the barracks where I lived while I was in Berlin.
Wow.
And I was actually able to look at the window. It was a former Gestapo school. But out of the blue, I was busy actually doing tour guiding in Berlin, which was interesting. I had a pass into East Berlin and would take people in a bus, show them Hitler's bunker and things of that sort.
Wow.
But one day, they told me that I had been given orders to report to Stuttgart. And I said okay, and was sent down there and became part of this interesting thing that was going on involving a Seventh Army Symphony Orchestra, which was being formed. What had happened is a general named McAuliffe, who had been in charge of the armed forces at the Battle of the Bulge, and the famous thing where the Germans sent over a declaration saying, "You may now surrender," and he sent back the one-word message, "nuts," which had the Germans staring at this word and trying to figure what that meant. At any rate, he was a heroic guy who happened to be a good violinist.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And he took it upon himself to say, we ought to show people in Europe, and especially in Germany, that there is an American culture, that this is not just troops marching around.
Right.
And whereupon he ordered the preparation of a symphony orchestra and sent the news out that players in the service that might be serviceable could be transferred to Stuttgart from Guam, from Hawaii, from wherever they were. And so, because of the draft, there were members of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra and other orchestras. It became really quite good. And the conductor, fine composer, Sam Adler, he was the first conductor of that orchestra, and they toured playing classics. And the general then said one more thing. He said, "Now, classics, that's for the Germans to listen to. For the troops, I want a soldier show. I want a musical comedy. I want something that can tour and again, show that side of American culture." And so I was selected to write a touring musical. And my partner from school who had written with me in the past was serving somewhere, I forget. They transferred him immediately to Stuttgart. And it was, I believe, I think September. And they said, "Now, you two start writing. When will you be ready to stage and go into rehearsal?" And we said, April. So we had a wonderful 6 months. We started writing in March. and meanwhile, we're traveling and so on. But again, we had our choice of instrumentalists, and we had brought over players. We contacted friends here in New York who'd been drafted, and it turned out that some really good Broadway tap dancers and so on had been taken into service. Our leading man was a tenor who is active today. He's older than I am and is the oldest living announcer on television. His name is Johnny Gilbert, and he is the announcer for Jeopardy!
Oh, wow.
This is Jeopardy! And so he was our leading man. We had some good females and so on. The show ran for 5 years.
Holy smokes.
Visiting various bases, touring England, for example. I conducted at the Opera House in Vienna because while I wasn't traveling with the show, I sure as hell wanted the opportunity to conduct there. So that was an interesting set of experiences.
So what was the time period that you were in Germany?
51 to 53, 1951 to 1953. I mustered out of the service. They offered me an officership if I'd stay and do more shows and things. I said, thank you, no. Went to London and settled there for a while, where did more writing, sold my first song to a London publisher, and I brought over several of my buddies from Germany who were leaving the army at the same time, and so we settled in an apartment in South Kensington. There were, I think, 4 of us living on the second floor of the apartment, and directly below us was a Signor Rossini, and he was a Rossini. He was a voice teacher, and he started his pupils and his training and his various melismatic exercises at about 8:30 in the morning. Now, we were not very active at 8:30 because we'd usually been up very late. And so after several days of this, I went down and said, would you be kind enough to not give lessons until perhaps 10 or 10:30? Some of our loyal boys in service are still sleeping at 8:30. And he was reluctant to make that change, and in fact did not. And we complained a number of times. And then a wonderfully British event took place. One of us, it wasn't myself, but one of us ran a tub for a bath and forgot that the water was running. And English plumbing has a certain fame in the world. At any rate, the tub ran over. The water ran down below, and it ran directly into the closet where Signor Rossini kept his coats, including a fur coat and so on, all of which became soaked instantly. And after a couple of days of taking deep baths, Signor Rossini came up and we reached an agreement. 10:30 would be the new starting time, and we would not take deep water baths. So English plumbing to the rescue, sort of thing. And at which point after that, I came home and went to work in New York ad agencies and so on. So that's the musical background.
Great, that's wonderful.
But I feel I had a good practical education, and certainly in musical terms and show terms, and for the next period of years, some 12 years or so, in addition to working at the museum, I was working at an ad agency for quite a period of time.
So how did you meet Paul Killiam?
Paul was older than I was by a number of years, but he had gone to Harvard, where he had done show business stuff there, and then he went on to law school, which became important because he ended up in some rather important suits about what films were owned, Valentino films and so on. But he also was an entertainer, and interestingly, 2 nights ago, I quite accidentally came upon a video of Paul on the Steve Allen show. Steve Allen preceding Jack Parr, preceding Johnny Carson, and so on in that Tonight thing. And Paul did a stand-up thing in which he used some silent film. He particularly had one scene of prehistoric figures carrying clubs and fighting each other. It was an early silent comedy. And he would talk about it and make jokes and so on. And in the process of his doing this stand-up material, he started collecting old film that he could, silent film and so on. And he had a nightclub called the Old Nick, which was on 2nd Avenue. And that group, it didn't last. It later became El Morocco. But at the Old Nick, he was doing stand-up, and he had a wonderful array of folks, B.B. Osterwald and Gene Barry. Jack Lemmon was his pianist.
Oh, wow.
Jack plays good piano. I had a lovely evening once doing four-hand stuff with him. And Paul also produced one Broadway show that had a 17 performance run, which is longer than Wind in the Willows, I might point out. But in the process of collecting film, he began to find religion, as it were. Working with a wonderful restorer named Carl Malkames, he started working on some serious stuff. And then the law part of it came in, and he engineered a deal for the estate of D.W. Griffith, which he would have the television rights, and the Museum of Modern Art would have have possession of the films and be in fact the owners in terms of being able to project them and to do performances. And that put him squarely in the middle of working on Intolerance, for example, in America, and Way Down East, and that whole assemblage of films. And he found that this was really fascinating stuff. I came on board his organization just at that time and started to prepare some scores.
But how did you meet him? Through Lemon?
It was through Harvard friends. And as a matter of fact, the first thing I did for him was I prepared a musical that was produced in New Canaan, Connecticut, and wrote some songs. And when he wanted to score silent films, he came to me first off, and I became the house pianist. And he had Gaylord Carter and Lee Irwin as house organists, and it was a pretty noble enterprise.
Yeah.
And he's the one who told me that there was going to be an opening at the Museum of Modern Art. Arthur Kleiner, I'll speak about in a little bit, but Charles Hoffman was playing there for a short period, and he was going off to teach in Canada. At any rate, I went to the museum and auditioned Broken Blossoms, mm-hmm. and was hired by Willard Van Dyke, who was and Eileen Bowser. Willard was the head of the department, a really good cameraman, have a famous film called The River that he did, documentaries and so on. So I felt great respect. So I was hired and put on staff. I was not a freelancer. I was a member of the museum operating team. Played there for obviously a number of years until
you were at MoMA for 12 years. Is that right?
Yeah, 12 years, and then went off to do productions and put stuff into orchestral form and all of the things that followed. But Paul really played a terribly important role in preparing the films for the silent years and restoring those. Working carefully on tinting for films that had originally been tinted, finding footage if it was missing. And by the time we did the first series, which Orson Welles hosted,
Oh yes.
and that really put the whole series on its feet because obviously Orson is a major figure in the film world, and at the time that we needed to have a host, he was going through a very bad economic period. He was doing commercials for California wine.
Champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence.
So he was happy to have that work. He did the first series. Lillian Gish hosted the second.
Good evening. I'm Lillian Gish. Tonight we're going to see Broken Blossoms.
What was the first silent film you ever remember seeing?
Broken Blossoms was the first, actually, because I had to learn it for the audition.
So you'd never seen a silent film?
I had
before?
not seen a silent film.
Most people in that decade, in the 60s, I guess, had never seen a silent film either because they were sort of buried.
Well, yeah, some film departments, I guess, may have made reference, but the silent years, which played throughout the country,
Yeah.
and people like Paul Phillips said, I looked forward to that every week, and when we recorded the love music from Gold Rush, he said that's what I used to listen to, because that was the theme music for the silent years.
Well, I don't know what to say about the Gold Rush. I don't think you need to hear anything.
There was no interest before that series. That really started everything in terms of the revival.
Yeah, I think it played a really important role, and because of working on all those films and preparing them for the series, I obviously got to know them well and worked with the editors and so on. Killiam himself had a series called Silence Please, and he was doing some of the same playfulness too. That was not a serious thing. He was doing commercials in which there would be silent film characters, and I'd have a score behind selling insurance or stuff of that sort. Killiam and his private collection became a real focal point for the silent film movement in terms of preparing things that would be seen on television.
How did he, how did he find all that?
He was a pretty good researcher, and those of us who worked with him would try to discover where the best print was of a given subject. And sometimes it was private. When he acquired the Griffith films, that brought a lot of stuff into our hands. And occasionally, as I say, as a lawyer, he'd have a lawsuit. He fought over Son of the Sheik of Valentino for quite a long time, and actually lost that case. So the museum was very, very helpful, and it was a really exciting moment, which you came into at a good time.
Yeah.
When all of this was being discovered and courses became more important. There were not the opportunities yet to do the kind of performing that you can do now, where colleges and other organizations and film societies around the world are looking for the best accompanist, who sits across from me. And
I learned from the best, Bill.
obviously, if you're going to be playing a piano or organ, you have to have some chops, because you may be playing for several hours, and the fingers need to be strong, and you have to be able to get around the keyboard pretty well. So that
your story about sitting down to play La Rue only to find out that it was twice as long as you thought. I mean, I've played films where it runs a half an hour over because somebody's made a mistake in in the film speed or something, but 2 hours is beyond belief.
That, and as you know well, the most dramatic thing you can do is to take your hands off the keyboard and the whole audience sits up because the silence suddenly alerts them.
And then people come up to you and say, "Oh, I love that when you stopped playing."
I must tell you, this is a little thing off the edge too, that I forget what film I was playing at the museum, but it had gone down well, and there was a little collection at the piano afterwards and saying thank yous, and we enjoyed it and so on. And a little gray-haired lady at the back of this group, she must have been in her 70s at any rate, she couldn't get in to talk to me, and she wanted to, so I went over to her and said, "Yes, I'm delighted you were here." And she said, "Well, I wanted to speak to you, Mr. Perry. You play too loud." And left. So much for the audience. But so at any rate, piano skill and stamina are part of it. Obviously, the ability to improvise. I mean, if you hope to do an hour and a half score written out and are playing regularly, you won't have slept or eaten at all. And
the funny thing is that people will come up to me and say, "How did you memorize all that?"
there you are.
People have no idea what's involved.
No, they don't. And the improvisational skill has several things that attach to it. One is the ability to play in, let's just say, a number of keys. I have heard players that have remained in one key, and as I say, that really lowers the value of the film because it doesn't seem to have an energy if you're hearing the same thing. So, having had good courses in harmony and sewing and so on, knowing that if what Piston used to call a 6+4++3, which was a dominant seventh chord, let's say E flat dominant seventh, it would then resolve into G major in a second inversion.
Right.
Very helpful tool because it can open up like the sun rising.
Yes.
You going out of that and ending up in a beautiful new key and so on.
Right.
So that's a thing that I think makes a good deal of difference, and those are things that you have obviously developed. And the other thing that I always insisted on, and I think did universally, even if I didn't know the film, I would establish a title theme, and the title theme could then be used throughout the film, different places, different keys, transformational, and so on.
And yours are very memorable. I mean, all of the film,
bless you.
All of the themes that I heard when you were doing them 50 years ago are still very fresh in my mind, and they are fresh musically also. They haven't, they're not cliched. They are your unique voice. And they, along with me and my colleagues, you have a wide audience of people in this generation and below me who grew up, whose first exposure to silent films is with your music, and that has enriched their whole appreciation of the genre. So hats off.
I am absolutely touched, and
well, it's the truth.
But the fact is that if you have a good title theme that appears in key places, it does. If the film is a not very good film, the reoccurrence of that theme makes the editing, makes the director's work seem intentional. Mm-hmm. It makes a bad film better. It makes a good film greater. So that's the first thing I would instruct someone. And when you came to audition with it, I believe it was something you had written for Birth of a Nation, as I recall, and it was a lovely theme.
Thank you.
And it was very convincing. This kid knows what he's up to. So those, and of course, with a piece that I wrote a few years back for mezzo soprano and orchestra, setting words to a number of those themes, that kind of finished the thing, because I have always wanted to do a text for Orphans of the Storm and what was happening, or for number Seventh Heaven, for example. That just demands, thematic writing.
Did you ever use other people's music when you were playing?
Only if it was a score that had, like a Satie score, that had its own identity, and I felt I owed it to the film that he had scored to use his music. So,
I mean, did you use Diane for Seventh Heaven, for example?
The answer is, for the original Silent Years, I used Diane, but I later wrote a theme for Seventh Heaven of my own. I'll always wait for you. In Seventh Heaven, stars will shine late for you to guide you there, and so on. But when we first released the film, I used Diane, and we recorded it with a soprano. But otherwise, maybe selfishly, the using other people's music had requirements of finding it, learning it, and so on. And if you used your own, you were obviously fully in charge. And of course, there was the fun, which I'm sure you've experienced, about not knowing a film at all except a title.
Many times.
And I had the rare instance of playing for a film called Xander the Great. It showed up at the museum, and I couldn't find anybody who knew the film. And so this was going sight unseen. And the question is, what is your theme music for Xander the Great? I took a little poll. I had a couple of votes for a historical epic with Alexander the Great. Somebody told me they thought it sounded like a circus strongman and so on. And of course, it's a 3-year-old kid who can't pronounce his name. So the film came up and the title came up, and you would think I was scoring Exodus or something like that. Huge chords, and suddenly it dawns on me it's about this little kid. So you run for cover. The big chords start to diminish, and the big theme starts to become a little carefree. And
that's funny. I mean, maybe the kid is great in his own mind. So
well, that's pretty subtle for the audience to capture. But yes, you do, I'm sure. And because you have made a number of discoveries in Jewish films, which you surely wouldn't have seen until they surfaced, and so on. And you may even have played something that you hadn't seen, but with improvisational skill, you can work your way.
Well, I mean, not just with Jewish films. I mean, for so long it was impossible to see some films if they were coming from Gus Filmofund in Moscow, for example, and they showed up at the last minute.
Yeah.
And so you have to just sit down and as my English teacher in high school was fond of saying, use your judgment and you'll be graded accordingly. and sometimes hitting it, and sometimes coming out with egg on your face. But that, I've always told my students though, and I teach at this workshop in Italy every year as part of the Pordenone Festival.
Right.
In Denver and other places, that the audience really never knows. They're not listening to the music, they're watching the movie. And so they sometimes forget. People come up and say, I forgot there was anybody playing live. And so any sense of ego about, I'm here to do my thing goes out the window at that point. Oh, there was music?
Well, not only music, but if you've got a good theme. You remember David Raksin, a composer I like a lot, when Preminger did the film Laura. And Raxon wrote that.
My dad loved that.
And he asked Preminger, how often do you want that theme to appear? I want it everywhere. And if you see the film I did a couple of years ago, and Laura is playing everywhere.
Well, is it too much? Is it too much?
Well, I would have liked a little more variation. Let's say a second theme or something of that sort. But it's absolutely gorgeous.
It happens to be a great theme. So,
as a matter of fact, there's a Raxon anecdote. He was asked about scoring a film for Alfred Hitchcock called Lifeboat, which is a boat out in the middle of the ocean and so on.
Right.
And Hitchcock finally came around and said, we don't need any music. Why not? Well, you have a boat in the ocean, so where would the music be coming from? And Raxon said, well, Hitch, where's the camera coming from? So he wrote a score.
After you left MoMA, you produced a number of significant film projects for your company, Great Amwell, starting with Anyone for Tennyson and then the Mark Twain series for PBS. Whose ideas were those, and how did you choose the material for the films?
Well, both ideas were mine. The Tennyson, because I have always loved poetry, and I studied with some excellent instructors at Harvard in poetry, and especially 18th and early 19th century. And now I'm writing a poetry column, and it's giving me great pleasure. And that was a question of selling it to television stations, because each of the public stations had to approve and offer X dollars. And if we got enough money, then we could do the series. Now, we're very lucky because people who had worked in California more than I had and so on were able to be persuasive. So we did have Henry Fonda, and we did have Claire Bloom, and Vincent Price, and so on. And so the poetry series, with that kind of name value, took on its own sense of being, and we ran for 3 years, which was a lot of 50 programs.
What were they like to work with, Fonda and Price?
Oddly enough, or maybe not oddly enough, they really enjoyed having something where there was quality words for them to deal with. And they worked at it. Fonda, we gave some lovely stuff. He was very pleased. Jack Lemmon, again, they things that they're not asked to do.
Right.
We did a wonderful program on World War I poetry with a chap named Darren McGavin. And Darren McGavin had regular half-hour shoot-'em-up type things. Was a very good actor and very honored to be doing this stuff, and he was absolutely wonderful. So we had no problem getting people, and we shot it in Nebraska, and it's not always easy to get somebody off Rodeo Drive and say, would you like to come to Nebraska? When I decided I wanted to do this series, and I needed a partner in the public television world.
Right.
And I had read that the Nebraska legislature, a couple years previous, had put up a sizable amount of money to build a state-of-the-art studio in the middle of the plains. And they would have this huge space to do Backyard Farmer and other local programs. So I flew out there and asked if they would be interested, and they really were. They thought maybe they'd never done a national series, and they wanted to have some respect.
Good for them.
And they had gorgeous studios. When I did a series on Byron, Keats, and Shelley, we had 3 studios operating, and they built a ballroom and all kinds of gorgeous sets of varying sorts. And they helped me when I was trying to collect the other stations, which included places like Indiana, where I was told by the program manager that he didn't do any sports programming, so anyone for tennis and just wouldn't interest him. And we had a fight with Channel 13 in New York because we went to them and said that we wanted to do this series and would they put up some money. And they said, if anybody is going to do a series on poetry, we'll do it. And dismissed it. Well, they ended up carrying it. I was told the station in Cleveland, we sent the pilot program to them, and they sat there and watched this poetry unspool in front of them. And in the back of the room, there was a FedEx driver or one of the delivery services. He just delivered stuff there, and he got caught up with it. And the program managers at the end of the program, there was applause from the back of the room. I love that stuff. Head of the station said, "Buy it." So thank you to whoever was delivering that day. The Mark Twain series developed. I can even one day show you the diner that I was sitting in when I said, you know what? I am obviously pleased because the programs are wonderful, but we're getting a lot of stuff from BBC and England in general, Shakespeare and so on. Come on, Shakespeare's important. What about something from an American? And it came to me that Mark Twain was somebody that we could build material around. For one thing, I was born a quarter mile from his grave. Mm-hmm. He's buried in Elmira. Right. And so that was how we started to develop the Mark Twain series. And the secret of that was, frankly, my traveling to Europe and putting together a consortium that included Germany, France, Italy, Austria. They all put up money for the broadcast rights to a Mark Twain series. Wow. And that financially made it possible. Mm-hmm. And then obviously tapping into Exxon and some of the major supporters of public television.
I'm interested, parenthetically, that you studied music at Harvard, but then you became a businessman. You know, how did you acquire those business skills? Was that on the job in the ad business, or
I was doing a lot of producing when working on ad stuff because in those days, in the 50s, ad agencies were producing the programs. Not you would have craft television theater, for example. That was an hour a week that was not done by the networks. We had directors in-house and did all of our own casting and so on. So the ad agencies, I learned direction, camera direction within the agency, and by the time I finished, had a couple of small things I could point to. I directed the first coast-to-coast color commercial, for example. I directed the first videotape musical commercial. That was for Jackie Gleason. And so I was learning camera movement from people who had just gone into the television business out of radio, and they invented a dolly shot and things of that sort. So I felt very comfortable in terms of going into that business myself. As far as finding money, Mark Twain was the answer and was the secret to that. Does anybody care about Mark Twain? Yeah, everybody cares about Mark Twain, and that's what brought the foreign money in. Yes. And that was delightful for me because in the process of making deals in Europe, usually it involved shooting on location. Austria would put money in, and we'd shoot a film, in this case, The Mysterious Stranger, in Austria. They would then provide a Viennese orchestra. I used the Vienna Symphony for doing scoring. We shot in Italy. We shot in France. which delighted me because we were doing a shot on a street corner and had cameras all over the place. And police ran to us and said, "You've got to clear. There's a cavalcade coming." I said, "We haven't finished shooting yet. Give me another 10 minutes. What we held up about 10 cars back was Ronald Reagan making a visit. So that pleased me.
Wayne would have liked that. Poetic justice.
That was exciting because it was shot in the Alps. I shot night scenes in the Parthenon on the Acropolis.
Right.
It was shot in the pyramids, camel trains set up.
Remarkable.
And I say this now with apologies to Egypt, where I am still a persona non grata, but we were shooting The Innocents Abroad, which among subplots involved a character from the Midwest who wanted to prove to people that he'd seen these famous sites. And he had a hammer and he had a chisel, starting with Notre Dame in Paris. And each place we went to, he was taking a little chunk. Now, obviously, your camera angle is such, and maybe this is the wall, and your sign of a chisel is here, and so on. Except the closing scene, which was in front of the Sphinx. And we were just about to shoot, and were told that we were going to be denied the ability to shoot there, and that there was a military group of some sort coming and be there in 5 minutes. And I said, "Everybody, you got 5 minutes, and we got to get this shot." It's the conclusion of the show that the guy with the chisel takes a piece off the Sphinx. And he was an actor from Illinois, I think, and got absolutely frenzied about that and took a piece off the Sphinx. Real life. And so the military arrived and said, "Give us that film." And they were pissed beyond belief. And I said, "Well, it's in the truck over there. Get the film." And so I went over there, and they quickly handed me unexposed film on a reel, which I delivered to the Egyptians. And within about 15 minutes, our reel was on its way to a lab in Italy.
A great story.
Yeah.
The Sphinx isn't telling.
So it's smaller than it used to be.
Amazing. That's an amazing story.
But that was a very exciting project. You may remember sitting up through a night copying parts.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody, and I had handed Richard Heyman, I said, "You got to score this," and it was a can that ran for 6-7 minutes, full orchestra, and he was sitting up, and people were. Jane was there. Everybody was copying music, and I remember that at one point you corrected my conducting and you said "You're being too active."
I said,
Yeah, I was.
okay.
Let's speed it up and so on. And you went off and recorded at another studio.
Bathtub rag, maybe?
Yeah, you were doing some smaller musical stuff. There were two studios side by side, and I was recording in one.
Yeah.
And Morricone was recording in the one next to it.
Yeah.
And I dropped in on that, and the producer of the film said they were long-held chords, and he said, "This is for a cavalry charge, maestro.
Yeah.
It's not exciting. You've written music that's not exciting for the cavalry."
Uh-huh.
He turned to the orchestra. "Everybody, tremolo. Same chords." Yes. But I stayed there the whole summer, went to editing every day, just loved it there. Mm-hmm. And when the World Cup soccer was won by Italy, and the whole city went bananas, and trucks from all over Italy bringing in crowds of people and so on. I like Rome a lot, and knew where the best ice cream was.
Can we go back to music for a moment, and let me ask you, who are your main influences in terms of the kind of music that you have written? Where were you drawing that from?
Well, a couple of, in a general sense, nothing is off the table, to use that phrase again. But I grew up with an extraordinary fondness for two different classes. One was the music of Delius, which I'm terribly fond of, and harmonically it's interesting, and atmospherically, and the English pastoral school. Obviously Vaughan Williams, and certain aspects of Elgar, and
Kinsey.
oh yes, you have this whole array of composers, and there are connectives with Delius. There's some connectives with Ravel, but the pastoral school in general, melodic. That's something that I can listen to Vaughan Williams symphonies till the cows come home, and always gain something from that. First time I heard the Serenade to Music or the Lark Ascending, and those, wow. I guess that's of music that would have impact on my own compositional style. Obviously, you're affected by Beethoven, you're affected by Mozart, and so on, but you're not working in the same stylistic situation. But that, I think, the Randall Thompson connection, again, melody that can get to people, and it's, if you're going to write film music, that's a big part of it, and the film composers who did write melodically. God, Max Steiner could pull a big theme together so beautifully, and others, and so on.
What do you think about the current state of film music?
I have to say there are a lot of films I don't go to or get to, and so I would only know it by subject matter, I guess. Horner, I thought, wrote some lovely stuff, but frankly, the film music today, if of course today for me goes back a ways. If you suddenly can encounter an Out of Africa or something like that, and say, oh, that's yeah. I just don't know enough of the films I should see more. Is there anyone that catches your fancy particularly? Or?
I like a lot of what Alexander Desplat does.
He's the best. I
Carter
think.
Burrell also writes
Yeah.
very interesting music. Sometimes Trent Reznor, who came into film music after being in a punk band, rock band, did the music for The Social Network, and for a film that we just watched called Empire of Light. Did you see that, with Olivia Colman in a small movie theater in Kent? That's very sweet, lovely music.
Yeah,
Very small scale compared to what John Williams is doing.
Yeah, Williams, of course, has just derived directly from an English classical thing, and big themes, and
Korngold.
And Korngold, yeah.
And Holst.
I didn't mention Holst, and
yeah.
I should have. Yeah, Korngold has always interested me, and I've got a couple books that I'm in the midst of reading, and the stuff that he was writing at age 16 and so on. I mean, he had fantastic technique as a composer, but when it came time to put together an Errol Flynn Robin Hood or something, wonderful stuff. And that hit me in my growing up period, too. And again, it holds a film together. If you can do something thematically and it comes back and it's like a welcome sound that returns and can make the plot suddenly take shape. It's so important.
So in your time at MoMA, you must have played hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of films there, yeah?
I guess.
What would you say, looking back, stand out as the top 3 or 4 films that you enjoyed playing the most, that you would revisit, whether you were playing for them or not, that you just liked them as films?
Well, at the top of the list, I would put The Crowd, probably. I had a chance to discuss it with King Vidor.
No kidding.
And this is kind of interesting. He came to a screening where I was playing for The Crowd. And afterwards I said, Mr. Vidor, one thing I'm sure you're aware of, but your editing just dictated how the music should be played, what the length of treatment is, where it should change keys. It just falls into place when I'm playing. And he said, when I edited it was to Tchaikovsky's Pathetique. That was playing all the time he was editing. And, which leads me to another small story about the editing process. You may remember a film called Breaking Away, about an Italian bicycle team that was challenging some kids in their hometown. And they had chosen a composer, I think Patrick Williams, actually. But when they were editing, the editor said, I want to get some spirit here while I'm working. Go down to the record shop and get me something Italian, because we got all these Italian bicycle riders. So kid went down and came back, and it's Mendelssohn's Italian Symphony. How Italian can you get? But he used it, and when the film was being seen by the producers and so on, they were so excited and pleased. Now comes the composer who's been hired, and he writes his score, and he records his score, and the producers and the powers, it doesn't work for us, because they had so much in mind. They went right back to Mendelssohn, and so the whole film is scored from Mendelssohn. For playing purposes, just films that are dear to my heart happen to be great films. I never tire of The Gold Rush. I never tire of the General. I play the General any time, and it's always a pleasure. And then there are the films that I've taken on because I just love them. The Beloved Rogue of Barrymore's, because it's so far over the top. In fact, Barrymore films please me no end. Just the size of his performance, whatever it is, and it's almost as if he's improvising. You know the scene where he's in semi-prison and he's been offered a drink, and the intertitles say, he says, "I want another drink," and the jailer says, no more, and then Barrymore says, "That's really terrible." A little bit of anger, except as you look at his lips, say, "Son of a bitch." So a film called Tempest. That's a Barrymore film about the Russian Revolution, and that's again Barrymore over the top, and they're fun to play because you can do things musically that I liked. All the films that had a nationalistic sense, Little Annie Rooney or things like that, where you could work in a folk style.
Right.
I wished I'd gotten to know more of the surviving figures from the silent era. Obviously, Lillian Gish was a surviving figure.
How did you meet her?
Well, there were a couple of instances. One was after Orson Welles did the first series of Silent Years. We wanted a figure that could be possibly of that size, and Lillian was available.
Why didn't you rehire Wells to do it?
He didn't want to do any more. He did all of those intros in one afternoon.
Oh, wow.
And as I say, without even notes and so on, he did 12 films and
Remarkable.
Introduced all of them. But Lillian was obviously a name above title,
Right.
So I got into the habit, whenever it was possible, of having what I call tea with Lillian at her apartment on 57th Street, which was rent controlled and had originally been rented by her mother, and the rent control therefore dated maybe to 1930 or something like that. And so she was paying so little rent.
Yeah.
But she loved her building, and when the elevator broke, she was delivering food and things up and down the stairs to people's place. But a visit to her was very special. I remember the first time I walked in, and there was a whole vase of roses, and I said, "Those are very pretty, Miss Gish." And she said, "Aren't they nice? They're from John Gielgud, dear." On the anniversary of the opening night of Hamlet, which we did together, he always sends me roses still. And so she had them there. She opened a drawer and showed me the pictures of her, the drawings that Caruso had done.
Wow.
He did a lot of quick study work and so on. I was there one day when the phone rang, and she was in dungarees. She looked 18 years old. And she went back and she said, "Hello." I said, "Oh, it's Mary Pickford, dear. Would you like to speak with her?" That sort of thing. Nobody knew the aspects of her life. She had a continuing relationship of some sort with the philosopher journalist Mencken, H.L. Mencken. And there was an occasion when Valentino came to her apartment, and he said, "I am really troubled, Lillian." He said, "I don't understand why people are screaming at me and so on, and clapping and doing all of this stuff that I don't deserve. I mean, I was a landscape gardener on Long Island, and I dance a little and so on, but I don't understand it." She said, "Well, I want you to meet my friend, Mr. Mencken." And so she put them together in a room and closed the door. And philosopher and matinee idol talked this through until the door finally opened. Valentino said, I guess I understand now. And so all of these little bits and
Wow.
pieces. I got her toward the end of her life, and at one point, I think this may have involved Beloved Rogue, I'm not sure, but she had to say one French line, "Où sont les neiges d'antan?" Where are the snows of yesteryear? And we taped it with her. Each syllable was a separate take. Ooh, thank you, Miss Gish. Now we're going to do son, because she was not putting it together. But she did Huckleberry Finn with us, which was very, very sweet. She was a lovely lady. To her dying day, always referred to Mr. Griffith.
Mm-hmm.
There was never any question of it was like George Abbott, the director, was Mr. Abbott his entire life, starting when he was about 20 or so. and till his dying day at 107. I hope somebody is going to give me that.
If there's any justice in the world.
He was still directing regularly at 100. He gave up tennis at 105. Said, I'm not getting to all the shots. Died at 107. So I do something for me. Yeah, Lillian was very, very special, and she carried her techniques from the silent days. Where's my key light? You haven't put up my key light. I can't do the scene until you know. That's all. Right here. Now adjust it a little to the left. That's fine. All that. Great gal.
Any other thoughts before we wrap up? I could do this all day if you can.
I guess the only other note I had was just an additional sign of respect for the orchestras that played for silent films in the heyday. Mm-hmm. I was reading the other day about Erno Rappe, who mm-hmm. ended up as conductor at Radio City Music Hall. Mm-hmm. And I remember as a kid, he started, his first conducting was with the Roxy Orchestra, and that he had 80-piece orchestra. Radio City had 111 players available, and he had a program on Sunday mornings and was doing most of the Mahler symphonies from Radio City on WEAF station. And I learned Mahler at that early age listening to the Radio City Music Hall. Is that weird?
It's weird, and I didn't know that he was that Mahler was being performed in this country much, except for Bruno Walter, and then of course when Bernstein came along.
Well,
we discovered him.
Rappe came from Hungary, so he was mid-European,
right?
And certainly a lot of contact with Austrian and Hungarian orchestras that were playing Mahler, mm-hmm. and so he decided to do some when he had an opportunity to do that here.
Fantastic.
So if somebody asks you, where do you learn your Mahler? Radio City. This is nothing like a rockette. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Bill, for your generous time.
My pleasure.
It's always a joy to see you. Our friendship goes back to 1971, and I hope it'll continue to 2071.
I like the way you think.